We're studying kind of and preaching parts of Judges this morning. We're in chapter 3 of the book of Judges, and I have 3 verses here that I won't be easier for me just to read them off the screen myself. When the children of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. But when the children of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for them, Ehud, man. By him the children of Israel sent tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. And lastly, after him was Shamgar, of the Philistines with an ox goad, and he also delivered Israel. And so we're going to look at 3 not that there's 333 chapters to Judges, no, but I titled it that because everything just, when I was studying early this week, a lot of 3s, and whether that means anything, I have no idea, but I just think things in 3, so I was kind of on that this 3rd chapter of Judges. And so there's 3 actual things that I want to share with you. Begin to look at the deliverers coming. And so far we've just in Judges, and we have pointed out this sin cycle that we find in the book of Judges. All the way through it, God continued. Once Israel was free, then they fall into sin again, and then God would allow one of the enemies around pray for God to help them, and then God would raise up another deliverer. And it was just a scenario that happened all the way. It was actually, so when you think about it, it was just a dark time in Israel because they just wouldn't stay faithful. It was a time of apostasy, time of backsliding about God. And so we find at this point in chapter 3 that Israel had been free since they had left the land of Egypt, okay? You know, and they were en route to the promised land, and Moses carried them up. And all this time they were free up until this chapter hits. And after these faithful, and there are 3 mistakes that they made at this point. It's pointed out in chapter 3. And one's in verse 7. So the children did evil in the sight of the Lord their God. So the first thing that they did was just forget all about God. You know, they had their freedom, right? And then they took that freedom for granted. And they forgot all about God, you know. Ain't that so characteristic of Americans today, right? I mean, we live in a land. All wars, they're fought abroad. They're not fought here. So none of us as civilians ever experience any. Have no experience whatsoever in it. And so far as we're concerned, it's just always been peace here, you know. You know, when things go well in our life personally, it's easy to forget all about God. When hardship comes into our life, but when things are going well, you know, when our finances are doing pretty good, when our health is doing pretty good, when things are, it's easy just to forget all about God. That's a big mistake. And we may be feeling, and things may be well in the hill again, But little do we know, we may be drifting and backsliding from God. And so many people, when they don't come to church like they ought to come. They don't pray like they ought to. They don't read the Bible. And the truth about it is, everybody, oh yeah, I believe, yeah, I'm a Christian. Yet they're living in a backslidden state. They're living in that state that's drifted away from God. Yet they feel like, and they say they do, but they forgot all about God. The second mistake that they did in verse 6, the first part of it said they took daughters to be their wives, and they gave their daughters to their sons. And that was one of the things he told. Do not take wives of these other nations. Do not. And he told them over and over and over, do not take wives. So when you go into the land, and we've seen that the last few weeks, when you go destroy or drive out all the rest of the inhabitants out of the land, it would be these two things we're looking at now. This was going to happen unto you. And we just have to separate from the world. That's what we have to do. When we can't partnership with sin today, he warned them, but they did it anyway. The third thing they did was that and that's in the bottom of verse 6, of the people. So that they took and they married amongst these other nations of the world, the Gentile nations, the gods that the Gentile nations had, and various different gods, and these were not good gods. These pagan nations celebrated and worshipped these gods because of all the evil that took place. The temple. And there was all grades of other things, kickbacks to people that, oh yeah, they like going to. But God had forbidden it. And even some of it, there was just like Baal or Baal, just like that God, I think it was really pronounced that most of the time. And they would take and serve Baal, and even to them. It was terrible evil that was going on. They would give them these idols, they said, and they worshiped these gods and praised them because rain would come, and because the sun would shine, and for fertility of their crops, and so forth and so on. The inhabitants of the land, they become like the inhabitants of the land. And when they married into them, they married into everything. And you have to be careful. Young couples need to be careful who they marry today. They don't need to be married people. If they're church going, they don't need to marry people that are. Times than not, they will lead you away from God. I know one lady that was coming here for some time, and when she met somebody, she's not been back since. But she was coming pretty regular, but then she's never been back after that. To marry into somebody who is not saved, not right with God, they'll, more times than not, you'll either be coming by yourself, you'll just become just like them. And that's what they did. I mean, if you marry somebody who feels this way, you've got to kind of go along with them. You can do everything the way I do it. And so they had to give in to the wives, and the wives had this, they had their little gods, and so you couldn't tell you will marry what wants to do. And then next thing you know, that's how it creeps in. Then there was 3 deliverers that God had. So because of those 3 sins, God reared up this. In fact, I like the think it is. It says, so the Lord strengthened Eglon, king of Moab, against Israel. Because God strengthened their enemy. Now think about it. This was a Moabite. These people were not God-fearing people. They didn't believe in God. They had their own. God is strengthening up Israel's enemy. He is like building up there for a purpose, and that was to conquer Israel. Can't help but to feel in life that there's times when God strengthens our enemies. He strengthens our enemies. Yeah, he allowed them to leave. He told them to drive them all out, but he knew that they wouldn't. And so he said, I'm going to leave these people for a test of you. And then whenever Israel sinned, he strengthened up the head of Israel and defeated Israel. So there were 3 deliverers that God raised. This first time since leaving Egypt, they were in bondage for 8 years. 8 long years. And they called out to God to deliver them from bondage. From this bondage. We miss our freedom. We want to do. Now we just slave for these people. 8 years. I can't called upon God to deliver them from this the whole 8 years. You know, I don't think they were crying out to God. They were slaves. I think as soon as they went into slavery and were defeated, they started crying in and started saying, Lord, save us, Lord, deliver us from this right in. So they had spent these 8 years asking God to deliver them. And you know, have you ever prayed for a long time for something that seems like, well, you know, it's easy to give up on? Right? If God don't come around next month or so, well, then next year rolls around and it's easy to just quit praying. Just give up on that. But if you're in a bondage situation, because you're suffering every day from what's going on. And as long as you're suffering, you're going to call out to God. So God heard their prayer. And then after these 8 years, he let them stay in there his determined amount of time. After these 8 years, he raised up this one called Othniel. Othniel was Caleb's brother. You may recall Caleb was Joshua. Came and they made it up to the border. The first time they made it up to the border of Canaan, that they chose 12 men to go out and spy the land. And to tell them what kind of good stuff was in this land they were about to go in, God had led them to take. One, basically a representative from every tribe. I mean, that basically they represented all the nation of Israel. There were 12 tribes, there were 12. And 10 of them gave a bad report, the Bible said. 10 of them said, oh, it does. We took some grapes right here. It took 2 men to tote this one limb of grapes. He said, those grapes are there. The stuff is there. But they're giants in the land. I mean, the sons of Anak are there. Oh, we can't go in and conquer that. But out of the 12, there were 2 men who spoke up to Moses and said, let us go up at once. And that was Joshua, right? Let us go up to this land. And it was Caleb alongside of Joshua. So now we find that Caleb here, his younger brother, to deliver them from this bondage that they were in. And there's nothing bad that is said here about this. Unfortunately, listed in Judges, they just won't really right with God like they should be. even though strengthens the hand of the enemy. Sometimes God uses somebody who's not even living right. See, God can do that. But all the difference in the world comes into play when God just chose ordinary people, I think. But then when the Spirit of the Lord came upon them, they became extraordinary, mighty deliverers. And so Othniel, it doesn't say a lot, it just says that God stirred him up to war and he delivered Israel. He led and freed Israel from his bondage. And I think there's two good things to say about this. And one deals with his of God, strength of God. See, even from his birth, God had already spoke a word when the time comes. He was going to be the strong arm of the Lord. And he probably never knew it, never realized it when the right time had come. He actually became the strength of God and led them on to bad is said about this guy is good. He delivered Israel. He led them in this war. The Bible says for the rest of his life, Israel had rest 40 years. Delivered him in Othniel by his hand, and now they rested for 40 years. Rest, Satan had woven into their hearts again, and they had got distant from God, and it fell back into sin again. God allowed this army to come in. In fact, it was the Moabites. It was Eglon, the king of Moab, because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. And then Eglon allied and gathered unto him people of Ammon and Amalek. When you think about Moab, and then you also think about Ammon, you have to remember, and these were enemies of Israel, right? Where they came from, where they originated from. And that was from was living in the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, where homosexuality was prominent. And God sent these angels to destroy. Abraham prayed, God, and he interceded for people of the city. They got Lot. It was Abraham's nephew and Lot's family, Lot's daughters. But the son-in-law, when he said God's going to overthrow Sodom, they just laughed and said, we got to get out of here. Angels came last night. They told me. And they just laughed at him. So the Bible said while Lot tarried, the angels grabbed him and his wife by the hand and pulled them out of the city. And Lot was also in a sinful place in his life. He would not, if he'd have been right with God, he'd have never lived in that city. He'd have never went. It was green. It had big cities, in that day. And the appeal of the things of the world got to Lot. Away from him. So now Lot kind of backslides and was living this life. The angels had to drag him out. His wife looked back and became a pillar of salt. You remember the story? So him, his two daughters, his wife was dead now, and the angel says, flee up into the mountains. If you remember the story, I'll just refresh your memory. That Lot said, well, hey, there's another kind of 5 cities in the plain. And he said, let's go to Zoar. let me go to Zoar, because, you know, it's got food, drink, you know, stuff there. And then he said, well, okay, go. One time he said, we better get out of this city. Because why? We realized the wickedness of Zoar was like the wickedness of the sins of the plain. And he's like, I can't live for this city. Now, if you look in archaeology, you'll find, by the way, that they sulfur ball is still in that region. Sodom and Gomorrah is still desolate under this day. Nothing grows right. And I've seen it online where people done it. You can just dig down a little bit and you can find little white sulfur balls. The Bible says upon Sodom and Gomorrah, and them sulfur balls, I have seen a guy, he just light it and it burns, you know, with a match. It's desolate unto this day. But Lot said, we better get out of Zoar before God. Even today, that I don't know if it is, I'm just telling you, nobody knows for sure, but they say that was Lot's cave, that's where him and his daughter stayed. But then, because they God, Lot got drunk. And the Bible expressly teaches against getting drunk. Become over-inhibited with any kind of beverage or drug or something where you lose capacity, and he lost it. You know, it was his own daughters now. They come up with this, our family name's going to die, we need children. And so they got their own fault. This is just how wicked and carnal they were, and worldly. And slept with their father, and had children. And one Moabites, and the other had the father of the Ammonites. And so here we find that these, and it was just because they done the sinful thing, thinking it was what they ought to do. But God was never in on it. Now these nations over and over and over began because of what they did a long time ago. I mean, you think what you do, right? It only affects you. It don't affect nobody else. But the sins that you're doing in your life, where they're going to take you in the future. Just tell you, folks. So, that this king Eglon of the Moabites conquered Israel. No, excuse me. Let me move on down to the right paragraph. And so after that first 8 years of bondage, and through Othniel, and this time they were in bondage for 18 years as slaves to those kings. And they cried, you know, the whole 18 years they cried to God about helping. So God decided to deliver them, and he raised up this man named Ehud. Ehud meant and strong. That's what his name means, united and strong. And again, he lived up to his destiny. He delivered Israel. He was a strong arm for the Lord. And this is how he delivered Israel. I thought it was interesting in this third chapter. And so this fellow Ehud not to deliver his people from the slavery. And that's how God begins to use somebody. Now, nobody being saved, then that's a good sign that God don't deal with you at all. Okay? And so, but people who he first began past, present, future, he's always done it this way. He first begins by placing a burden in people's heart, a conviction. They care about this bad situation that's there. And he cared to the point that he had to do something. And so they said, Ehud, the Bible says, he fashioned this dagger. He makes, you could buy them everywhere in those days, swords and stuff, right? He makes his own dagger. It has a sharp edge on both sides of it, which was unusual. 18 inches long. And at that time, Israel, of course, it was always this way. It's called tribute in the Bible. And we call it taxes. And so they would tax the people. That keeps them in line. Let's keep them poor, right? That way there won't be no threat. And we'll get rich off these people. So he was taxing Israel. Well, Ehud come up with this plan to tax money to him. And he makes this dagger. And he takes and he hides this dagger in his clothes. And he goes with a group of King Eglon. And the Bible said that Eglon was a great big man. And they took the tribute. You know, the king prior to this, there's no information that he did. And then after they give him the tribute, and they start, y'all go ahead on. But I need to stay. I got a secret to tell the king. So he lingers behind. And when he tells the king, he said, I got the king sent everybody away. And it was just him and Ehud. And then Ehud, important that it spoke to me. You find it down verse 20. He said, I have a message from God for you. And that's when he takes his dagger out he had, and he just stuck right on the end, right past to the guy. And he killed him. But he didn't die instantly, right? So then Ehud left, and at this time they were up on the roof of the house. And then back in those poor days and in that part of the world, they often went upstairs up on top of the roof. This was probably enclosed. It was a king's residence, and so up there it was a little cooler, you know. And then he locked the door behind him. And then it says that this was God, right? All of this was God. He checked on him for a while. So they started to, and then they said, well, he's probably tending to himself, and we better leave him alone. And the Bible said that gave Ehud time to get out of the city, to leave, get way away. And then what he did, Ehud went back, and apparently they had been talking a lot about this, right? They all knew that when they heard the sound of that horn, God had delivered that nation into their hands. And it rallied up all the warriors, and it was delivered like that by the hand of Ehud. And then there was a third deliverer that it spoke of in this chapter. His name was Sham. Israel had rest after Ehud did what he did for 80 years. Okay? And then Shamgar come in, and there's only one with an ox goad. And he kind of, I think he was in on this era, and I think he was kind of like, it was the next chapter, Ehud died. Okay? And so he was kind of like Samson wanting. I'm going to get to it in Judges. But this guy Shamgar was another strong arm right by himself. When God's Spirit would come upon him, he took this ox goad and Philistines right by himself. And you know, ox goad, a goad is point to it. And sometimes it would have like a piece of metal that was pointed to come out. And what they do is they use it to, you know, prod the cattle and And I thought about Saul, or better known as the Apostle Paul. You may recall, because before he was converted and his name changed to Paul, he was zealous Orthodox Judaism, and he went around persecuting the Christians. You remember that when Saul was converted, God spoke to him, and God illuminated and around him, and he went blind. And then that's when God spoke these words, Acts 9. He said, when he spoke to Saul, and Saul said, like, hello? I'm Jesus, whom you're persecuting. It's hard for you to kick against the goads. For cattle or animals, and even today they have goads that sometimes they're electric that they use to manipulate the cattle. It's kind of hard to go against that if you ain't got no weapon in your hand. And that's what Paul, he's like, it's really hard for you to kick against the goad. And that resonated with him. He's like, oh yeah. It's kind of hard to go against that. It is hard to go against God. Period. It's hard to fight against God. You say, well, I don't fight against God. If you're not fighting for God, who are you fighting? Who are you living for? So, well, I just do my own thing. I just live for myself. You're not living for God. The way the Bible puts it. The last thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to move through this quick because time's tied up. There are three things that God wanted to teach them through all this. And test, and also back up into chapter 2, the word test was used in regards now to pagan nations that were left in the land. The word test was used 3 times. In chapter 2, verse 20, and also verse 4. The word test keeps popping up. I've left these people to test you. To teach them, in other words. He left them in the land to teach them. And then we find the word know in those first few verses, chapter 3. And it uses the word know or known. It's like over and over. In fact, it's 3 times in verse 1 and verse 2. You haven't known war. And the younger men who haven't known war, you need to know war. You need to know what war is. It was not God's will that they lead the people in the land. He made that clear. But people in the land. He knew that. And then he knew that he would take and use those people to keep Israel. Because if everything had continued to go right for Israel, again, let's think about what would have happened to Israel. What if God never? They would just get evil and stay evil and get worse and worse and worse and worse, and they would have never got on their. Today, if they were still around, would be no part whatsoever with Israel. So God, it wasn't so because God's hateful, God's mean, God's vengeful. It was more the keep pulling his people back to him. And the only way that he could keep Israel coming back to him was to send bondage to them. They had to know war. They had to know it. And look, the horrors of war, there are 3 things. It was teaching. He said, I'm going to test you with these people. He taught them to know the horrors of war, to know the bondage of war, to know the hurt, so that you wouldn't do that, so that you wouldn't turn on me. Can't help but to feel like that's just the same place we are today. We just don't want to learn. You know, people get saved, and next thing you know, for some folks, it's only a coming. I love church. I love church. I've heard people tell me that. I love being in church, preacher. I love being in church. And today they know we're around. You know. And then we'll turn back to God when emergencies come up, or when surgeries come up, and then we'll turn back to God. I'd like to pray for you. Yeah, preacher, pray for me. And as soon as they get on their feet again, went on with Israel. It's the same old thing going on with Americans today. The second thing was the teacher. Not only physically, but spiritually. You know, the Christian life is a battle today. And you think you got saved and now things are going to be great. But you feel great on the inside. And see, there's the thing. On the inside, things can be great. Bad. And more times than not, Christians lose their joy no longer because the things on the outside overwhelm what's on the inside. You see, and that goes with the Lord. Because I'm telling you, if you get right and you're really right with the Lord, even though things on the outside are bad, things are. That's the way it was when you and I first got saved. That's the way it should be today. It's your own fault because you're not where you need to be with the Lord. And the third thing is, he wanted to teach them to be obedient. Verse 22, I picked up that in verse 4, chapter 3, and to be faithful in verse 8, and also verse 12. Through the bondage, through the defeat of war, to learn obedience to God and to be faithful. I think there's great lessons, and found in here in the book of Judges, in chapter 3. Some folks today, they're just living in the time of bondage. Oh, they're not in chains, they're not in the prison. Crying out how to straighten this thing out in my life. And you'll say, why? That's because God is using this, strengthening, and He's expecting you to call on His name. You know? He's expecting you to turn to Him. And don't think life out like in the twinkle of an eye. It just usually happens that way. Bondage lasts a long time. But God can do it. And be faithful to the Lord. Now, be faithful. Don't think that just because you made a decision one time, now you go out living the way I want to live. And Israel backslid on God. Israel was conquered, defeated, and would not have had freedom. In the state, not right with God. And the thing to do is to repent. Liberty again. And He's always faithful. Always there. Always willing to deliver. We're going to close out with this hymn. And if you want to come pray, please do.